There we are, recording now. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for coming. And welcome to the first event of the Fall 2021 Wells College Visiting Writers Series. I am Dan Rosenberg. I'm the director of the series. And as always, I want to begin by thanking the New York State Council for the Arts, NYSCA. Their financial support has allowed this series to thrive for many years, bringing incredible writers into our community. And we're all really grateful for that. And tonight, I'm particularly excited that Ada Limón will be joining the ranks of those writers who have read with us. Here's how the evening is going to work. After my little preamble here, I'm going to introduce Ada, who will then read. And throughout her reading, if you think of a question or a comment, or you just want to react to a line or a moment, really anything at all, I encourage you to do so right in the chat there. And then during breaks between the poems, I'll jump in and read out what you have written, so Ada will have a chance to respond. And that way, this space will be a little bit more dynamic. If we have time at the end, we can go to a traditional Q&A as well. But you, the audience of the Visiting Writer Series, have a tendency to be so engaged that we don't have that time at the end. And I love that. That's great. I'd much rather have this natural, organic conversation that takes us to the end of our time. So the structure is similar to how we've done our virtual events from this past year. And I just want to thank the many of you who I see along the top of the screen who have been attending those and are back with us. It's lovely to see you all. And to the new folks who are joining us, welcome. Wells College prides itself on being a small, personal, and deeply engaged community. And I hope that these events will still feel that way to you, even though we're doing them through screens. So welcome everyone. And now I will put in the chat here, while we're doing these things, a link to how to order Ada's most recent collection, The Carrying, or the newly released 15th anniversary edition of her first collection, Lucky Wreck, both from our local Ithaca bookstore, which is community owned and independent and just wonderful, Buffalo Street Books. So they're the links in the chat. And I would encourage you, if you don't already have these books, go get them. And now I have the absolute honor of introducing our reader. Ada Limón is the author of 6 poetry collections, including The Carrying, which won a National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. Her 4th book, Bright Dead Things, was a finalist for the National Book Award, the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and the National Book Critics Circle Award, which is ridiculous. Fantastic. Her new collection, The Hurting Kind, will be released from Milkweed in May of 2022. And she's a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship in Poetry, and Ada serves on the faculty of Queen's University of Charlotte, low-res M.F.A. program, and lives in Lexington, Kentucky. Ada has also just begun her tenure as the host of The Slowdown, which is a wonderful podcast initiated by Tracy K. Smith when she was the poet laureate. It features the host, now Ada, introducing and reading one poem every weekday. And if you chose to be here right now with us, you'll almost certainly want to subscribe to The Slowdown. I do, and it's fantastic. And I'm really excited to see what Ada does with it. Yeah, and I'm excited about that in part because Ada Limón is extraordinary to me as a poet of empathy and ethical commitments. She visited my poetry workshop today, and there were so many wonderful things that came up. But one that stood out for me was that for her, and Ada's very careful not to suggest that other writers should behave this way, but for her, it's important to ask permission before, say, publishing a poem about someone in her life. And that permission isn't just to avoid hurting their feelings or harming them, though that is a concern. She wants to make sure that the poems honor the actual world and the people in it, that they treat the world and all of its complexity with honesty and fairness. My work is about interconnectedness, she said. So writing a poem that was false about the connections between herself and her subject would be not just an ethical failure, but an aesthetic one. And most of Ada's poems seem autobiographical, and she's pretty much owned up to that, which lends to that sense of openness and honesty that pervades all of her work, which critics have called accessible and, my favorite, winningly unpretentious. And fair enough, right? And Ada has herself said that the trajectory of her poetics has included a growing appreciation of simplicity and directness. But discussions of accessibility in poetry so often divide people into camps, right? There are some poets who like narratives and might sneer at the navel-gazing pretentiousness of more experimental poets, who in turn might sneer back at the accessible poets for condescending to their readers or abandoning complexity for cheap popularity. Part of what I love about Ada Limon's work is that it doesn't engage with any of that bullshit. She's accessible and complicated, narrative and deeply concerned with the materiality of her language. I think, Ada, you called it chewiness in the class visit today, the chewiness of the language. Her poems may seem at times almost impossibly hopeful, but the hope is born not from naivete, but from a clear vision of the weirdness and wonder of living, what she's called in an interview, the ugly mess and beautiful strangeness of the world. Her first book ends with a 13-section poem that's about feral cats, but also about her stepmother's cancer and a pervasive grappling with real and potential loss. And it ends by turning back to those cats, which she never trapped and which we lost sight of for much of the poem. And reflecting on them, saying, and this is the end of the poem, "We must accept the cage we are given, that someday we will be released into the unimaginable. And until then, praise the walls and all the parts of us they manage to hold so dearly." I love the voice that can, in one long breath, praise the walls and accept that they will not hold forever. It's a complicated hopefulness, and one that I've seen her poems convince their readers to share, which is why I'm so thrilled that we'll get to hear Ada Limón read some more of her work tonight and talk with us. So Ada, hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
That was such a beautiful introduction, Dan. I feel very moved by that. And I feel like we could just end the event right there. That's enough. And that was really beautiful. And I'm very honored. It's really marvelous to be here. I wish I was in person, of course, but it's been hard. I just did an in-person event for the very first time since February of 2020. And I will let you know right now that I'm much more relaxed. You're getting a much better Ada than the folks that I was just with, only because it was my first event. And I was, let's just say I was tight as a fist. And I'm much more relaxed here. That will change, hopefully, as I get more used to it. I kept saying, I'm still learning how to be a human being, as we all are back in the world. And I know you guys have been able to keep your community going in person, which I found is wonderful. And I'm so happy for you all. Not the case in Kentucky, unfortunately. Our numbers are very high. So we are still, for the most part, really kind of locked down. So I thought I would start with a poem. I guess a poem. And I've been spending the whole day with other people's poems, which has kind of been a dream for me to just do that, to just bathe in other people's language. But I was thinking about this poem. It's more of a spring poem, but I was thinking about it because as I was working, I work outside on my porch most of the time as a screened in deck. And which in Kentucky, you have to have the screened in because it's of the mosquitoes and bugs. But I kept seeing some of the weeds pop up, and I kept thinking, I need to stop what I'm doing and go pluck the weeds. And then I kept thinking back to this poem, which always makes me think, who is it that gets to decide what's a weed and what's a flower? So this poem is about a dandelion. Dandelion insomnia. The big ass bees are back, tipsy, sun-drunk, and heavy with thick knitted leg warmers of pollen. I was up all night again, so today's yellow hours seem strange and hallucinogenic. The neighborhood is lousy with mowers, crazy dogs, and people mending what winter ruined. What I can't get over is something simple, easy. How could a dandelion seed head seemingly grow overnight? A neighbor mows the lawn, and bam, the next morning, there's 100 dandelion seed heads, straight as arrows and proud as cats, high above any green blade of manicured grass. It must bug some folks. A flower so tricky it can reproduce asexually, making perfect identical selves. Bam, another me. Bam, another me. I can't help it. I root for that persecuted rosette, so hyper in its own making, it seems to devour the land. Even its name, translated from the French dent de lion, means lion's tooth. It's vicious, made for a time that requires tenacity, a way of remaking the toughest self while everyone else is asleep. You know, dandelion poems. My husband was like, as many people do who like a manicured lawn, really hates dandelions. He's always saying that, you know, if we ever get in an argument, it's going to be over that poem.
It's so funny. I remember feeling betrayed when I went to a restaurant and saw dandelion greens as a salad. I was like, my mom told me to pull those out, that those are weeds. I was like, wait a minute, these aren't,
right.
I can eat
They're
these?
very nutritious.
Yeah.
And you know, I wanted to do something because you guys had talked about it earlier. And for some of the students that I met, and since you were reading Lucky Rec, I wanted to read, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I thought maybe I could read the first three sonnets of the crown of sonnets in Lucky Rec, the Spiderweb, just so, because I was talking about the music when we were in class, and I thought maybe it would be helpful to hear it out loud, and you could see how I changed the meter and changed the rhyme scheme and kind of took it out of its strict Petrarchian form. The Spiderweb. 1. The orb spider continues to spin a whole road map of a world on our large black living room window. Each thread a highway to its charge, the intricate lace of white lines stuck where a fly waits for its nip in his tuck. It's so sturdy it will hardly ripple. The whole house has to shake for it to shake even a little. As the cars pass, it is solid as it is strobed. Headlight after headlight, the same high beams run like upside down waves on the ceiling. But the web holds the fly, anxious for the final blow. I watch the spider come close like a spy, unsure if I'm jealous of the web or the fly. 2. Unsure if I'm jealous of the web or the fly, both of them sure of their beginnings and ends. I slip into bed and lie there beside your body like a buoy that the ocean resents. If I could just grab hold and find a way to paddle, if you could stop dragging your feet along the gravel. As a child, I remember knowing how to float when sober was the wind and my body the boat. Now each step is anchored and you continue to drift in the room where we pretend that we're alive, where you and I commit the sin and you and I forgive. This is holy, but not the winds could shift. Let some higher being take back the power as we mistreat our bodies minute by minute, hour by hour. 3. As we mistreat our bodies minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, the laundry piles up like driftwood and debris. There is no coffee in the kitchen and the milk's gone sour. I won't dust the living room so the spiders are free to march in the corners and over piles of mail like prisoners who have recently overthrown the jail. Open a window. I can hear a voice in my head. Get dressed, get out, wash the sheets on the bed. It's not God, I tell you. It's my mother, though there's little difference between the two. I'm convinced the two are planning a coup. She'll say, I've got two problems. I'm one and you're the other. She's right, you know, the tide is too high, but we could drown in a glass of water, you and I. That's just the first three, and then it goes on. But I just wanted, because the students had asked about that particular poem and the sort of formal constraints of a crown of sonnets and that repetition. And so I wanted to give them that opportunity to hear it out loud.
Thank you. Actually, James and Joanne have both been keying in on your use of figurative language, in particular, like your body like a buoy, the ocean resents.
Mm,
And James made the point that it is surprising, at the same time so apt, that it feels inevitable. And we talked a little bit about like your use of and like pursuit of figurative language before. But could you tell us a little bit about like I think we're reading in that intro class The Poet's Companion,
oh
which
yeah,
um,
great book.
right, and it celebrates Sharon Olds, who I know you worked with,
Yeah.
as someone. I think they say something like, we think she has a simile making machine in her basement that just churns them out all day and all night. But thinking about like the aptness of metaphor, and do you
Mm.
think in figurative language in those ways? Like, do those connections come naturally to you, or do you work at them?
I do, and I think for the most part, a lot of creative people do. And I think that it's really how we remember things. It's how we make associations. It's, I mean, so much of thought is comparing one thing to another, is saying like, oh, there's a heaviness in my chest, or, it feels like there's elephants sitting on me, or there's like, whatever it is, we're like, oh, I've got butterflies in my stomach, or, we're always trying to describe something, how we're feeling, with some kind of metaphor. Um, and I think that I'm always interested in the weirdness of that. Like, how it is weird to say that you have butterflies in your stomach, or that, I think I love that, the strangeness of that image. And so I feel like I'm always interested in the way we make those metaphors and associations and figurative language, that's sort of idiosyncratic to us,
Yeah.
that feels like, oh, that's how I would describe it, even though I don't know if that's at all how anyone else would describe it, but that makes total sense to me. Um, I think I also have sort of the luckiness of not being able to ever remember idioms. I get them always, like I always get them screwed up. And so in that case, I always sort of make them up new again, because I can't really remember them. I'm always saying like, oh, it's not like I was born on a turnip truck, and people are like, that's not what the saying is. But and I was like, so it's like I fell off. It's not like I was born yesterday, fell off a turnip truck. I'm not quite sure actually. But so I constantly have that working for me as well, which is that I'm not quite sure what the real thing is to say. So I'm always searching for it anyway. But yeah, I do think that way. I think my brain is constantly thinking in figurative language, remembering things in a certain way, and making those associated connections.
Yeah, it's funny just how you described that. You were talking about essentially taking figurative language literally. Like I'm sure there are people who hear butterflies in your stomach and don't think about butterflies, right? Like
Right,
they don't take it seriously. They just translate it to I'm
right.
nervous or whatever, right? But I think much like children, right? Poets are paying attention to the actual words and saying, wait, why'd you put them together that way?
Yeah,
It's great.
I find it fascinating. In fact, I have a poem about that.
Please.
Um, which is it began with the phrase downhearted, and that idea of like what it was to be downhearted. Downhearted. 6 horses died in a tractor trailer fire. There. That's the hard part. I wanted to tell you straight away so we could grieve together. So many sad things, that's just one on a long recent list that loops and elongates in the chest, in the diaphragm, in the alveoli. What is it they say? Heartsick or downhearted? I picture a heart lying on the floor of the torso, pulling up the blankets over its head, thinking the pain will go on forever, even though it won't. The heart is watching Lifetime movies and wishing and missing all the good parts of her that she has forgotten. The heart is so tired of beating herself up, she wants to stop it still. But also, she wants the blood to return, wants to bring in the thrill and wind of the ride, the fast pull of life driving underneath her. What the heart wants The heart wants your horses back. But you see that began again with that actually imagining what that statement means. Downhearted, heartsick.
Yeah, that's great. Also in that moment, you said, like, so we could grieve together, that
Mhm.
that turn to the addressees. Actually, a student from the class told me afterwards that she had been trying to formulate a question for you and couldn't get it right and didn't want to just talk it out at you. And I said, first of all, that's very kind and generous of you, because most questions involve people talking things out, but
I'm
also
happy to have people talk things out, but yeah.
that is what I said. I said, poets of all people will understand this impulse to try to talk around a thing that you don't have words for yet. Like, you will be in good company if you say this. But what she was interested in was this one moment in one of the poems in your first book, "A little distantly as one should,"
Mhm.
just this line, "The woman looks like that bartender, Kim."
Mhm.
And the student, Hannah, was just struck by the "that bartender, Kim," which
Yeah.
is like a very New York school moment, right? Where you're
Yeah.
just casually mentioning a thing that assumes that, like, we've been to the bar with you, that
Right.
sort of thing. And there's a similar sort of move in Downhearted, right? Where you said, so we could grieve together, that positioning the reader as already a confidant or already a familiar.
Yeah, I think I'm always sort of struck by people who don't consider that there's someone else on the other side of the poem. Um, and that's okay, because sometimes we can just write poems for ourselves. I mean, I think that's very true. And that's okay. But I think sometimes I do that. And sometimes it is a very much an act of connection and consideration and reciprocity that I want to be able to make something that is then given. And part of the making is recognizing the other on the other side of that. Um, and sometimes it's a specific you, right? And sometimes it's not. But I think that's really important to me, at least in how I perceive my own making of the poem in the first place, is when that reader is considered. At what point is it? At the very beginning? Is it in the revision? With that poem in particular, I didn't want it to be a punchline. It felt so important to me to know that the event of the poem started with the death of the horses. And instead of being like, and then I'm going to get there, I didn't want it to feel manipulative, right? I wanted it to be like, no, this is here. This is it. Let's get it out of the way. As opposed to make it the ending. And then like, I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want it to feel manipulative. I wanted it to feel like, I'm just going to tell you the straight truth right off the bat. And then let me tell you about this act of grieving.
That's fantastic. The comments in the chat are, again, celebrating some wonderful imagery, right? And just loving the poem, and then noting the importance of trusting the reader versus manipulating the reader there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think there is a certain amount of trust, but also, like, you're making a choice when you announce it up front. You're positioning the speaker of this poem in a very particular way, and therefore positioning us, the readers, to sort of trust this voice that is saying, look, I'm telling it to you straight, right?
Right. Right. And that move in a little distantly as one should, that bartender Kim, it's like, okay, I'm just going to be talking to a friend here, like that, who I'm talking about, that bartender Kim, right? So I feel like that's this, and that poem in particular has that way of moving that feels very much like it's considering the reader. In fact, why don't I read it?
Please do. Yeah.
It's funny to hold this book again. It's so exciting. I just want to let you guys know that it's in 4 sections. So it's 3 pages. It's not terribly long, but I feel like everyone should get a little bit of a warning. A little distantly as one should. 1. I keep wanting to write about accidents and how I hate them, and it's so obvious everyone hates accidents. So instead, I've been watching my neighbors set up their picnic table and tent. Do you call it a cabana? The man is wearing a bandana and a leather vest without a shirt, a look I've never learned to appreciate, even though I am from California. The woman looks like that bartender Kim, but younger. I've overheard that they're expecting company in approximately 45 minutes. I've noted the time. I'm excited for them. It's hard to be excited for things, not the same way that I used to be, or maybe it's just that I don't get stoned anymore. Jake and I listened to Neil Young album in my apartment over and over again for hours. Every time I tell someone that he's died, the same image pops into my head. He's sitting on the windowsill with the light behind him, so you can't see his face. I'm very aware that he's younger than me. He wasn't stoned. Jake was a good kid. My friend all the time says, I'm so excited. And when I ask her for what, she just shrugs and says, aren't you? I suppose so. Yes. 2. Up on a mountain near Lake Tahoe, I once fell in love with a boy named Billy, or was it Bobby? I was 13 and he was humoring me. I needed humoring. We had driven to the campground in a huge blue station wagon my dad had rented on account of our gear. It felt unsafe. Station wagons, for all their air of safety, always feel unsafe to me. The way nuclear family should sound comforting, and yet it only sounds like something that's going to explode. If you've ever driven to Lake Tahoe, you know the roads, long curving gray snakes of pavement, edged by mountains and those drop-offs. I hated them. I still do. But when you have to get somewhere, you drive on them. I have to tell myself this all the time. You can't really stop going places because you're frightened. It's like that road sign. That's the image of rocks falling down on a mountain road. I never knew what you were supposed to do about that. Duck? Is it saying that inevitably a rock will fall on you? Is it a good thing that we know this? I am obviously unsure of the usefulness of inevitable things. Even the word inevitable is awkward and hard to spell. I never kissed Bobby or anything, although I probably should have. 3. Sometimes I think the memory of an event is better than the event itself. The way the retelling of something is satisfying. That's why it's so unsettling when I can't remember everything in detail. I want to remember the exact song that my brother and I were singing in the back seat of the rented station wagon. All I keep thinking of is Respect by Aretha Franklin. I can't imagine that's what we were singing, but maybe that's why it stands out. It was unusual, like the car and the roads. I can convince myself of anything. My neighbors, the my there is so endearing, it makes me love them, have finished with their cabana, and the Kim lady is power washing the chairs. They're laughing and getting along well. She doesn't mind his vest. Now I'm almost sure it was respect. Seeing them in print can help facts become fact. When I think about it, I would like to go back to Lake Tahoe, where it's warm out, and swim. That's where Jake was when he died. The car went off one of those roads I mentioned earlier. I was going to tell you then, but it felt strange to write it down. But now the guests have arrived. They were 21 minutes late. The vest is lighting the barbecue, and one woman is pregnant and in overalls. The whole thing is so domestic and soft, you could almost wear it. 4. I've gone out to the fire escape and come back now to my desk. I wanted to be there with my neighbors for a while. The Kim lady waved, and I waved back, a little distantly, as one should, as if I cared only a little, as if they were only a fleeting thought, and me simply a body on a windowsill, passing through. I never read that poem because it's so long. I feel, it's not too long, but I'm never sure if it's, but that's a poem that I remember working on in particular with, it was again one of those moments where I didn't want to use Jake, right? I didn't want to use him as a subject in a way that felt untrue. And the only way I could do that was to just try to sort of map the mind, like we were talking about earlier, which was to just let my mind wander and to go with the neighbors and to go with and just be like, that's how this grief is happening. It's not happening in some sort of overwhelming thing. I'm not, suddenly going to make him into some martyr and all the stuff that sometimes we do with elegies and eulogies and all those things. But I wanted to just show that there was something working there, and honor him, but also in a truthful way.
Yeah, as you were reading, I was thinking about how you tagged the last poem of this first book, The 13 Feral Cats, as like a turning point for your own poetics,
Yeah.
and about that willingness to sort of chase your own mind rather than have it quite so planned out. And hearing you read this, I was like, oh no, you can see the kernels of that in here. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. It's just letting it go. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if would you read another one that you feel maybe veers even further in that direction from a later book, maybe?
Yeah, like it goes with the.
Yeah, I feel like I'm offering up requests now. If you had things that you wanted to read, don't let me.
No, I love it. I love it. No, I stayed open.
Awesome.
I'm trying to think of one that sort of fits that following of it. Oh yeah, this one might. This kind of has that idea of like, well, it's funny, a lot of them do it. But I think this one, this is maybe the most wandering one. This is called On a Lamppost Long Ago. I don't know what to think of first in the list of all the things that are disappearing. Fish, birds, trees, flowers, bees, and languages too. They say that if historical rates are averaged, a language will die every 4 months in the time it takes to say, I love you, or move in with someone, or admit to the child you're carrying. All of the intricate words of a language become extinct. There are too many things to hold in the palm of a brain. Your father, with Alzheimer's, uses the word thing to describe many different nouns, and we guess the word he means. When we get it right, he nods as if it's obvious. When we get it wrong, he closes his face like a fist. Out walking in the neighborhood, there's a wide metal lamppost that has scratched into it, Brandy Earlywine loves Jack Pickett. And then there are the hearts. The barrage of hearts scratched over and over, as if, just in case we have forgotten the word love, we will know its symbol, as if Miss Earlywine wanted us to know that even after she and Mr. Pickett have passed on, their real hearts stopped, the ones that don't look like anything like those little symbols. They frantically, furiously, late one night under the streetlight while their parents thought they were asleep, inscribed onto the body of something like a permanent tree, a heart, so that even after their bodies have ceased to be bodies, their mouths no longer capable of words, the universal shape will tell you how she felt. One blue evening long ago, when there were still 7,000 languages that named and honored the plants and animals, each in their own way, when your father said thing, and we knew what it meant, and the bees were big and round and buzzing. So I think it does do that. It just kind of, it's very much like where the mind is wandering, following it all the way.
It's wonderful. And the bees reoccurred, right?
The bees come back. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that you are, Emma points out thinking about languages dying hits hard. And
Oh, yeah.
were you I know that you've read Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, right?
One of my favorite books. Yeah.
Yeah. And she talks about learning her sort of ancestral language and how full verbs it is, and how like the water lakes and the water rivers, instead of thinking of each thing as its own discrete noun to be objectified, then instead so many
Right.
objects are verbs, right? It's such a
Yeah.
um
Like I know that in Natalie Diaz's language, it's that the green is also a noun. So green is I mean, green is a verb. So green is like constantly moving. It's not we don't use it as as just the adjective.
right. Yeah, that stuff is amazing. There's actually the famous Sappho poem, "He seems to me like a god, that man who sits beside
Mhm.
you," that one that has the line that's always translated really poorly. It means something like "greener than grass I am,"
Yeah.
and the greener we think, because this language has died, right?
Right.
Her dialect of Greek is no longer spoken or even really well documented. But like the prevailing theory for that line is that green just meant like new grass,
Right.
and that word only came later to mean specifically the color, and at the time it could have meant any other attributes of new grass, including being wet, right? And so it becomes a much more sexual line that way, and it's just
Right.
a thing that was lost to centuries of translators because we didn't have
It's a color. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was just a color and not something else as
Hmm.
well. That's fine, and that's connected to what you were saying, that Caroline celebrated the palm of a brain, which feels very much like that, like a slightly off idiom, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm always just sort of visualizing what I would say, not necessarily what a saying is. Yeah.
Um, um,
I thought I could read another poem that does that a little bit. This is out of the new manuscript. You
awesome.
can see my husband gave it an A+. I think.
Nice.
So, this is high-end material. This is A+ material. But this is a poem I wrote again, kind of playing with the idea of words. As you can see, like many of us, obsessed with words. Which is the word lover. And how it's sort of like some people just find it so gross, right? They're like, oh, like, I don't know if I have friends that literally, if you say the word, they're just like, that is the worst word in the world. And then other people use it and it's kind of lovely. And so I wanted to write this poem of sort of engaging with that word in some way. Lover. Easy light storms in through the window, soft edges of the world smudged by mist, a squirrel's nest rigged high in the maple. I've got a bone to pick with whomever is in charge. All year I've said, you know what's funny? And then nothing. Nothing is funny, which makes me laugh in an oblivion is coming sort of way. A friend writes the word lover in a note, and I'm strangely excited for the word lover to come back. Come back, lover. Come back to the 5 and dime. I would squeal with the idea of blissful release. Oh, lover, what a word, what a world, the gray waiting in me. I need to nestle deep into the safekeeping of sky. I'm too used to nostalgia now, a sweet escape of age, centuries of pleasure before us and after us, still right now, a softness like the worn fabric of a nightshirt. And what I do not say is, I trust the world to come back, return like a word, long forgotten and malign for all its gross tenderness, a joke told in a sunbeam, the world walking in, ready to be ravaged, open for business. Oh, yeah. I can't even say that word in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that poem that I just read is actually going to be on Poem a Day in October.
Nice.
Yeah. So
That's
it's kind of
to subscribe to everyone. Another free way to get a poem sent to you every day, in addition to the slowdown poem a day, is a lovely other thing to just Google and add to your repertoire.
I agree. I love it so much.
Um,
Oh,
there's a plug for me. Thank you, Joanne.
I love it. I'm going to look it up. I'm gonna look it up. Wait, what was it called?
It was called Order.
Oh, I did. I read that poem and I really loved it. In fact, someone actually asked me if I had read it, and I went and read it, and I loved it. It was beautiful.
Oh,
I hadn't put those two together. Oh, what a pleasure. I love that. Thank you for pointing that out.
oh, thanks so much. See, I always need Joanne in my corner. Just that's that's fantastic. So now we're all going to be looking out for each other. Thanks so much, Ada. That means a
Yeah,
lot to me
good.
that you like that.
Beautiful.
This is not about me. Let's hear more of your poems. I talk too much in these things, and I'm always like, shut up, Dan. People aren't here to listen to you.
No, I love it. It's a good conversation. I'll read this poem, which we didn't talk about this very much in the class I visited, but I'm very interested in sort of interrogating why things interest me. And so most poems sort of start with there's something that I'm like, I'm interested in this, but then why am I interested in it? And that then leads me to some place that is hopefully less superficial as the sort of the thing in the beginning where you think, oh, this is something I like or dislike, right? It's always asking why. And so this began as an interrogation of why it was that I liked the sound of sports as someone who's not a huge sports fan. I don't mind them. I don't really, but I like it when they're on in the background, like the sound of baseball in the background. And so I wrote this poem, and it really just began with the question. Sports. I've seen my fair share of baseball games, eaten smothered hot dogs in Kansas City and carne asada burritos in San Francisco in the sunny stands on a day free of fog. I've sat in a bar for hours watching basketball and baseball and the Super Bowl, and I've even high-fived and clinked my almost empty drink with a stranger because it felt good to go through something together, even though we hadn't been through anything but the drama of a game, its players. If I'm honest, what I love, why I love, the sound of the game, even when I'm not interested, half listening, is one thing. When my father and my stepfather had to be in the same room, or had to drop my brother and me off during our weekly move from one house to another, they, for a brief moment, would stand together in the doorway or on the gravel driveway, and it felt like what true terror should feel like. Two men who were so different you could barely see their shadows attached in the same way. And just when I thought I couldn't watch the pause lengthen between them, they talk about the playoffs or the finals or whatever team was doing whatever thing required that season. And sometimes they'd even shrug and make a motion that felt like two people who weren't opposites after all. Once I sat in the car and waited for one of them to take me away, and from the back seat, I swear they looked like they were on the same team, looked like they were united against a common enemy, had been fighting all this time on the same side. I feel like there's not enough poems about complicated parenting and step parents in particular. And we have so much sort of poor mythology around our poor step parents. And there's so many wonderful step parents out there who've done a marvelous job at raising people and are doing it now. And it felt like I wanted to talk about that a little bit. And the new book deals with that on some levels. But in particular, it really did start out with the question of what it was that I liked about that sound. And it began like, oh, because it was the thing that united these two people that to me were born at odds.
That's wonderful. When you started talking about this, I started laughing because my wife has no idea how baseball works, but she just loves listening to it and, just around the house all day. And when my stepdad just came to visit, the two of them could talk about baseball in a way that belied the fact that Becca doesn't understand how the game works. But she knew the characters, right? She knew
Yeah.
the announcers and she knew some of the terminology, which she loved. And it was just like, it's amazing to see the connections available to people through that shared like language.
Commonality. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something really interesting in that. And so clearly that's one of the things I wrote about. So that's in the new book as well. And then let's see, we were talking about prose poems earlier. I had mentioned that I sort of, have learned to love them more and more as I've grown older. Now I just adore them. And every time I see one in a magazine, I want to eat it up. I love them. And so this is a prose poem that will appear in the new book. And I know that, and maybe you guys have been like this, but during the pandemic, many of us have sort of been obsessed with our birds and our bird feeders. I liked my birds to begin with, and then this was like doubling down, that it became just like they're, obsessed with our feeders. It's a prose poem, so it reads a little fast. Calling things what they are. I pass the feeder and yell grackle party, and then an hour later I yell morning dove after party. I call the feeder the party and the seed on the ground the after party. I am getting good at watching. I'm getting good at watching the feeder. Oh, sorry. I'm getting so good at watching that I've even dug out the binoculars an old poet gave to me back when I was young and heading to the Cape with so much future ahead of me. It was like my own ocean. Tufted titmouse, I yell, and Lucas laughs and says, thought so, but he's humoring me. He didn't think so at all. My father does the same thing, shouts at the feeder, announcing the party attendees. He throws a whole peanut or two to the Stellar's jay, who visits on a low oak branch in the morning. To think there was a time that I thought birds were kind of boring. Brown bird, gray bird, black bird, blah, blah, blah bird. Then I started to learn their names by the ocean, and the person that I was dating said, that's the problem with you, Limón. You're all fauna and no flora. And I began to learn the names of trees. I like to call things as they are. Before, the only thing I was interested in was love, how it grips you, how it terrifies you, how it annihilates you and resuscitates you. I didn't know then that it wasn't even love that I was interested in, but my own suffering. I thought suffering kept things interesting. How funny that I called it love, when the whole time it was pain. Prose poems. I love prose poems. They can just like be so sort of, they get weird, they just, again, the map the brain, those weird connections of this, fast, fast, fast. Yeah. So when I ended that poem, I thought, oh, and I had no idea where it was going. I was just going to go with this and follow it. And then suddenly it was like, oh yeah. And then I remembered that line. That's an actual line that someone I dated said to me, which was, that's the problem with you, Limón. You're all flora, you're all fauna and no flora, which then encouraged me to learn trees. So.
Were you dating a poet? You can't do.
No, I was not.
Okay.
The fiction writer. Worse.
Oh.
Way worse.
Oh, what a funny thing.
I'll read one more poem. This is a poem that was in the New Yorker in May. And I think that when, like many people, where we are at, the pandemic started, I rely on poetry to get me out of everything. And then it suddenly couldn't do that. And so I was very disheartened by poetry. I couldn't write it, and I didn't even really want to read it. And then of course, what do you do when you feel like poetry has betrayed you and let you down? It's like you write a poem about it, which feels like just the exact poetic response is like the. So this is a poem called The End of Poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith and our father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and the bud, skin and God not forgetting and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun and the drama in the acquaintance's suicide, the long lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego. Enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child. And enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. Enough of the brutal and the border. Enough of, can you see me? Can you hear me? Enough I am human. Enough I am alone and I am desperate. Enough of the small animal saving me. Enough of the high water. Enough sorrow. Enough of the air and its ease. I'm asking you to touch me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this. And we are, yeah, okay. I suppose we should stop on time. I don't particularly want to, but there is some more things to do. So I'll say some things, and if people had any parting questions or thoughts, please feel free to throw them in the chat here. But I will wind us down by putting in here again links to a couple of Ada's books that are available for purchase. It is indeed a beautiful, beautiful reading from James. Thank you. I will note that our next virtual reading isn't until November 9th. That's when Kazim Ali will be joining us via Zoom. But yeah, right. But all next week, we have an artist in residence, Michelle Gilmontero, who is a poet and translator and publisher of experimental Latin American poetry, and just a fascinating, wonderful human being who's going to be offering poetry writing activities and a public lecture and a broadside printing activity, a public reading, so much more. And the links for all of those events are here on our Facebook page, or you can go to wales.edu/visiting writers, which is right there. I'm just sending links to everyone. There you go. Wherever you found out about this, you can find out about our future events. Thank you all so much for coming. And Ada, thank you for sharing this work and having this conversation with us. It was
it's my deep pleasure. It was such a gift to be able to be in conversation with you. And can I just say you're just such a marvelous host. I just want to praise your hosting skills. Not only can you speak eloquently and off the cuff, but you also can negotiate the chat, fill in the chat with links, and be so welcoming and warm to your guests. So I'm very impressed by your hosting skills. I wish all hosts were like you. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy. And I will see, I think, thank you. And James mentioned making the Wells events public. I'm going to see what I can do about if we can live stream even the in-person ones for those who can't be around. And if I can find a way to do that and make it work and make it not crazy, I will blast that information out to wherever you all saw tonight's reading. You will get that information as well. So I'll see what I can do, because I do think it's one of those like gems, the silver lining around the cloud of the past year and a half has been that the community gets to be bigger and gets to be more geographically diverse while still feeling connected. So thank you all for coming. And Celeste, we miss you too. And yeah, thank you all for joining us tonight. And Ada, thank you so much for kicking this off in such a beautiful way. It's really, it's such a treat to get to hear your work and to chat with you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, truly. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.